Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Section 5 of Comparative Criminology. In this section, we're going to talk all about international policing. So, first, if we're going to talk about international policing, we first have to talk about borders, right? Borders are a completely man-made concept differentiating space between one country or state or city or county or whatever and another. Right? So most people think of borders as international borders, but there can also be within a nation borders. For instance, in the United States, we have state borders and county borders and city limits and all those subnational borders. And these borders, again, they're entirely man-made. One of the things that astronauts very commonly say when they return from space is that they looked at the Earth and it was nice to see no borders. You know, when you look at a map, there are these artificial drawn lines, but in space, you can't see any of that. It's all just Earth. But borders serve to differentiate people, i.e., if you're born on this side of the border, you're a citizen of this country, but if you're born on that side of the border, you're a citizen of that other country. They also dictate social and economic policy, right? So in this state, we might allow alcohol sales 7 days a week, but 10 feet that way on the other side of the border, they don't allow alcohol sales on Sundays. Or, you know, that's a very kind of mild example, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about in everyday life. Obviously, there are larger policies when you're talking about national borders. And of course, it sets the limits on power, right? The Texas State Police don't have any power on the other side of the Mexican border. But the Mexican police don't have any power on the north side of that border. So it kind of regulates who has power to do what and where. Now, interestingly, borders are not just physical and geographic. One of the great examples of a non-geographic border is what in China they call the Golden Shield Project, but is affectionately known as the Great Firewall of China. There are 30,000 people working in that country to make sure that Chinese citizens do not have access to parts of the internet that the Chinese government does not want them to have access to. You'll notice in this graphic up here, that is the exact same Google search outside of China and inside of China using the same website, same search terms. But if you search it inside China, it gives a completely different result than when you do that same search outside of China, because the Chinese government doesn't want its people learning about the Tiananmen Square incident back in the 1980s, I believe. So this is an information border that exists exclusively in cyberspace. Now, when we talk about international policing, there are kind of three levels that we have to talk about. The largest is the macro level, right? This is national / international legislation, regulation. One of the big examples here is the Berne Convention, which was originally, the first got put down in the late 1800s, and it governs copyright law. So anybody that signed on to the Berne Convention, which if you're watching this, almost undoubtedly your country is a member of the Berne Convention, you have to respect the copyrights of all the other countries, or the citizens of all other countries that have signed on to that international treaty. The MESO level is the operational structure and procedure. So how exactly are we going to get an extradition from country A to country B? If we need help on a case, which member of our country calls which member of your country? That kind of thing. And then the micro level is individual cases. Here in the United States, we have a person fleeing from justice that flees across the border to Canada. How are we going to work together to get that person arrested and extradited back to the United States? Now, why is international policing such a big thing now? because it's way bigger now than it ever has been in human history. But it's cheap travel and fast travel. You know, for hundreds and thousands of years, only the very, very rich could afford to travel to another country. The vast majority of the people in any given area lived and died within 50 or 100 miles, maybe, of where they were born. But now, travel is so cheap and so easy, I can be on the other side of the planet in 24 hours, no problem. Also, interconnected markets, right? We're no longer just kind of a national or even regional economic market. Markets are truly global. You know, I'm recording this on a computer that I'm sure has parts made in China and Taiwan, and you know, I drive a Japanese car, and my clothing is made in South America, and the economic market is absolutely global to the point where it's kind of difficult to determine where each piece and part of any given thing that you buy is coming from anymore. And then finally, the international policing is big because of the internet. The internet is causing, or I shouldn't say causing, but helping crime become truly global. Everything from cybercrime itself to things like drug importation. The internet has vastly improved the ability of criminal drug importers to get drugs from Colombia to the United States, for instance. So the internet has facilitated both new kinds of international crime and easier, faster, and cheaper forms of even traditional forms of crime. Now, what are some of the difficulties in policing in an international context? Well, probably the most obvious is the language barrier, right? If you're doing some kind of international policing function, odds are the people in the country you're trying to talk to don't speak the same language that you do, right? So, for instance, I obviously am a native English speaker, and thus, if I was trying to do, as an American police officer, trying to contact another country to get their help with some kind of international policing issue, it would be fairly easy for me to contact, say, the UK, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, Canada. But if I was trying to contact, say, Mexico or France or China or Russia or, you know, any one of almost as many countries as there are out there, I don't speak their language. So step one would be either, you know, finding somebody in that country that spoke English, or finding somebody in this country that can translate for me, and that always makes it difficult, right? There's organizational structure differences. So maybe a lieutenant on your police force is the level that would deal with this issue, but in the other country it would be a captain, and you don't know that, so you keep asking the lieutenant for help, but they can't because in their country it has to be a captain. So, you know, and that's a fairly simple example, but just the way organizations are structured can cause a lot of difficulty in trying to get things done when neither group knows what the structure is for the other. Government hostility, right? So governments of countries either really like each other or sometimes really don't like each other. But for instance, the United States and the United Kingdom, great friends. There would be very little government hostility with those police from those two countries working together. But now let's say the United States and Cuba, or Russia and Ukraine. Those governments are not going to work together very well, and thus trying to have an international police activity is going to be much more difficult. You can have a lack of prearranged policy, right? So hopefully, if two countries are going to be dealing with each other a lot, they will have some kind of policy and procedure to go through when having to deal with them. Like, I'm sure that the United States and Mexico have one of these prearranged policies where if one country needs help from the other, there's a way for them to do that. But there are situations in which it might be very, very rare for two countries to deal with each other, and thus they haven't taken the time and energy to create one of these prearranged policies. Maybe to pull two countries off the top of my head, Brazil and Belgium. They probably, they don't share a border, they don't even share a continent or even a hemisphere. So those two countries might not have one of these prearranged policies where if one country's police force needs help from the other country's police force, they'd be kind of beginning from scratch in the middle of that case, right? And then there's a lack of communication. We have policies and procedures for communication within our own organization, so we're no longer pursuing this case because something happened and we decided to let the person go. We might inform our organization of that, but maybe we don't inform the people in the next country over who we told to be looking for them or something, right? So we remember to kind of talk to the people we work with. Sometimes we forget to talk to the people in a different organization that we've asked for help or sent a message to, or told to be on the lookout for a certain thing or whatever. Now, organizations. There are kind of 4 levels of international policing organization. And the bottom one obviously was cut off by that image, and I'm going to have to update this slide deck. But there's global organizations, there's regional organizations, there's national organizations, and there's what's called glocal organizations, which are local organizations that have some kind of focus that puts them in an international context often. So for instance, a sheriff's department on the Texas border is a local department, but it probably has a lot of contacts on the other side of the US-Mexico border. Or maybe the Los Angeles Police Department might have a cybercrime unit that deals with international issues a lot. So that's a glocal organization. But we're going to go through a few examples of the first 3. So Interpol is probably the most famous global international policing process, right? So they were established in 1923. Originally, it was kind of mainly or exclusively in Europe, but now it is truly global. And movies and TV shows make Interpol sound like its own police force, but it's not. It uses police from its member countries, but the only thing Interpol really does as a super or supranational national, I always say that wrong, supranational body is intelligence, right? They don't send Interpol officers out to arrest people in other countries. They send officers from that country out to arrest people based on intelligence given to them by Interpol. And famously, kind of 3 of the main things they do, although this is by far not a complete list, the most famous thing they do is send out notices of wanted offenders. And these are termed red notices. So let's say somebody robs a bank in Germany and we suspect that they fled to some other European country. Interpol would send a notice to those other countries surrounding Germany saying, hey, be on the lookout for Bob Smith. He's suspected of robbing this bank in Germany. Here's what he looks like. Here's his known aliases and known contacts and all those things. Please be on the lookout for this person. Missing persons, yellow notices, i.e. Bob Smith's daughter has gone missing. Please be on the lookout for her. Here's what she looks like. Here's when she disappeared. Blah, blah. And then, of course, green notices are warnings of criminal activity. So say, hey, country next to you has seen a huge increase in auto theft. You might want to be on the lookout for car thieves in your country, things like that. Now, one of the cool things they do is they keep giant international databases of things like stolen vehicles. So if, the French police arrest somebody with a car that has German license plates, they can just call Interpol and say, hey, is this car with this VIN number and this license plate stolen? And Interpol can look it up and say, oh yeah, that was stolen from Germany 6 months ago or whatever. They keep a database on counterfeit currency, because one of the easiest ways to kind of pass counterfeit currency is to do it in a country that the currency is not from. So you can create counterfeit United States currency and pass it in, the Philippines or Taiwan or something, where they know it's American currency and they know how much it should be worth, but they're not used to it, so they don't notice the small imperfections that show that it's counterfeit. They keep a giant fingerprint database for criminals. So, if you arrest somebody in one country, you can say, this guy's not from around here. Let's see if he's wanted in any other countries. You can send Interpol that person's fingerprints, and they can say, oh, yes, that's Johann Vanderschnoodle, and he's wanted in the country of Switzerland. They keep a giant database of stolen passports, because stolen passports are often used by people to try to illegally enter other countries for nefarious purposes. And then, of course, stolen art. You'd be amazed at how much art theft happens internationally. I thought it was a very rare thing until I actually started looking into stolen art. No, stolen art, it happens all the time. Much more common than, watching the news and movies and stuff would make you think. Okay, so for a regional organization that helps international policing, the example here is Europol. Okay, it's like Interpol, but European specific, and it's run through the EU, and thus any member state of the EU is obviously also a member of Europol. This needs to be updated because the UK is no longer in the EU as of this recording, but all the other blue countries you see in the map above are EU member states, and they're part of this European police task force, I guess you could call it. And they have about 1,000 people working just for Europol to help kind of track offenders and track stolen items and help each other with intelligence and manpower and all those different really important jobs. But one of the kind of interesting things here is the European arrest warrant. And this is where one country can put out an arrest warrant for a certain person, and any other country in the EU is kind of obliged to arrest that person if they find them and extradite them immediately to the original country that put out the arrest warrant. So it's kind of like an extradition treaty, but covers every EU member state and is much more kind of simple and straightforward than a traditional extradition process. Now, a national agency that really has an international policing focus is the USA's Drug Enforcement Agency, right? This is a federal level criminal justice agency that focuses on drug manufacture and drug importation and drug sales. And they don't just have a job to do in the United States. They have, as of this recording, 86 offices in 67 different foreign countries. This map is a little out of date. There's been a few more added since this was created. So basically, these DEA officers go to these other countries and help them deal with drug manufacture and drug export. And the intention is that if the DEA helps these countries with drugs in their country, it will help stem the tide of drugs flowing into the United States, right? But because of this, what this means is the United States has a really heavy influence on drug policy and drug enforcement in these other countries. These other countries want closer relationships with the United States, both politically and economically. So they kind of allow the DEA to have an impact on when and how drug laws are created or enforced. And it's a very large influence on outside countries. Which brings us really to kind of a larger picture, and that is the United States has had a really huge influence on how other countries do things legally. Everything from drug laws to economics to the internet, how the internet is regulated or not regulated in any given instance, to copyright and intellectual property, all these things. It really started with the Cold War, right? Post World War II, the United States was not only on the victorious side, but it also was very, very undamaged compared to the other victors of World War II, like the UK and France. They had just seen a giant war, whereas there was almost zero damage to the United States itself. So economically, we became this giant powerhouse of manufacturing and creation, and that really gave us a huge influence on the rest of the world. And of course, the Soviet Union was also trying to do a very similar thing, and it became kind of this, which side, the United States or the Soviet Union, can create more nations as allies. So both the United States and the Soviet Union were giving these countries a lot of international aid and military aid, and trying to make them friendly with us instead of the other. So countries really wanted that money, and they really wanted that influence, and they really wanted the protection of either the United States or the Soviet Union. So they started adopting the policies that those countries wanted them to adopt. And in the United States, we really wanted people to say, take our side in the war on drugs. We don't want you to treat drugs as a medical problem. We want you to treat it as a crime problem and start arresting people and putting them in jail. So countries that wanted to be on the side of the United States in the Cold War started saying, okay, we'll do that, and created drug laws that the United States wanted them to create. And then 9/11 happened. Huge terrorist attack in the United States. And the United States wanted to go after terrorism and terrorists. So other countries that wanted to be on the good side of the United States said, okay, we'll go after terrorists too. And they started kind of shaping their anti-terrorism task forces and policies and procedures in the way that the United States wanted them to. And this whole process of like exporting criminality and criminal justice and crime issues, the term for what the United States has done over the past 70 years is a transnational moral entrepreneur. We think X is wrong, so you should now think X is wrong if you want to be our friends. That's an oversimplification, but that's essentially what's going on with this whole process. And now in the 21st century, it's getting kind of larger and bigger, and it's not just the United States anymore. Globalization truly has taken hold and created this very different world, because of cheap travel and the internet and all those things. There's a space-time compression, right? It no longer takes weeks to get a letter from the United States to the UK. Now we can do it instantly, the speed of light. So things happen faster. Things happen over a wider geographic space. All of society is networked. Everything's linked. Everything from, markets to, legitimate markets like cars and computers and, clothing. It's also communications and drugs and criminal organizations. Everything is networked together, and a change in one vastly influences the others, right? So the drug market in Afghanistan has an influence on the drug taking in the United States, which has an influence on burglary rates in Tennessee, which has an impact on. So, it's kind of that classic thing with a butterfly flaps its wings and it causes a tornado 1,000 miles away. And one of the reasons this is happening is what economists call neoliberalism, which is a very complicated concept, but just for our purposes, the very simplistic overview is markets and goods should travel as fast and as far as they can economically, and state governments, national governments should have very little to no impediment to that. Let the market flow with little restrictions and little regulation, and that's causing global issues of crime. It has been called a criminogenic asymmetry, right? There are crime and economic winners, and there are crime and economic, let's say, non-winners, right? So to give an example, we love drugs in the United States. We take a lot of them, cocaine and heroin and other opioids and marijuana. So we want to import those. So less economically successful areas of the world provide that, right? Especially in South and Central America, but also obviously the Middle East, Afghanistan, places like that. They send all the illegal drugs that Americans want to the United States. And then there are things we don't want, like toxic waste. And it costs a lot of money to dispose of toxic waste here in the United States. So instead of doing that, let's take the cheaper route, send it to a third world country. Now, both of those, importing drugs and exporting toxic waste to third world countries like that, is illegal, and it makes the lives of any given citizen in each country very, very, very different. But in the West, we want crime to make our lives better, and economic. And we have all this money, we have all this time, we have all this energy. We want drugs, and we want movies that we shouldn't legally be allowed to obtain yet, and we want all these things. And somewhere in the world, there's somebody who says, "Oh, I can make a few dollars doing that, and with those few dollars, I can feed my family. I'm going to provide that." So, in the long run, it can, in many cases, cause kind of a further stratification of the haves versus the have-nots. But that's one of the issues. And again, globalization is a huge, complicated concept, and we're going to be talking about it many times over the course of this course. And we could do course upon course upon course on just globalization and its effects. So this is a very, again, kind of surface level discussion of how globalization works, what are the positives and negatives, what might the future hold. So we'll get into it more in the next section, but therein is the end of section 5. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.